what I wanted to talk about tonight was the Paramis, because I believe that you were listening to Susie talk about the 7 factors of awakening last week.
Mm-hmm.
And so the 7 factors of awakening are really best developed on retreat. You know, they're more retreat practices, a lot of them, although we can bring them into daily life. In the time of the Buddha, they were taught on retreat. And the Paramis are qualities that are really for our daily lives. So many, I'd like to read this piece from you, from Kittisaro. Some of you know Thanissaro and Kittisaro. They were both monastics. And after they disrobed, they went to South Africa and began to teach there. But what they found was the community that they were in, people were really suffering. There were so many things, illnesses with no medicine, no water and electricity, people coming in because they'd been hurt fighting. And so it was overwhelming. And he said, we were regularly flooded internally and externally with helplessness, exhaustion, yearning, hopelessness, and despair. Qualities that I'm sure many of us are familiar with. And so he says, to survive and be relevant, we realized our spiritual practice had to stretch beyond meditative calm, beyond sitting, to embrace the surrounding field of so much need and suffering. And so he saw that in any kind of community where there's trauma and deep fundamental wounds underlying the culture, the natural expressions of care, compassion, generosity get damaged. And even though people may hold those ideals, we need to be doing work to transform. And that's more than meditation. That's somehow finding ways of living that help the mind bring out the beautiful qualities. He said many people of all the different colors and races were suffering. And that's true in our culture right now. A lot of people are affected by fires, floods, virus, poverty, many different things, loss of work, not being able to see their families. There's a huge number of things that are happening in our cultures right now. And so the systemic teaching of the Paramis, and he calls it building your temple of awareness, is such a gift right now. It's like throwing a lifeline to people who are feeling overwhelmed and isolated. It's a wonderful thing to receive that. And it guides us back home to a solid ground and a sense of community. So I'll just read this last piece. Most of us frequently experience the feelings of being swept away. And so these teachings enable us in moments to emerge from the flood, from being swept away, into brightness and stability of an unobstructed heart. And the 10 paramis, I'll talk about them more, the 10 perfections are a spirituality that's holistic, that covers every aspect of our lives, that envisions well-being on all levels, every level of our being. And so he goes on to say, in today's world, and he wrote this book 10 years ago, filled with so much inequality, injustice, suffering, and conflict, these human virtues remind us we're not isolated. We live in a relational field. And the realization of true peace isn't just about letting go, but living mindfully, remembering and healing. And so these are beautiful qualities. The Buddha did teach about each of these paramis. They're called parami, and parami can be paramount, of paramount importance, or it can mean perfection, both those meanings, and also traveling across the floods. And that was how the Buddha taught it. And so the list was created after the Buddha died, but each of the qualities were things that he taught. And in Buddhism, as you know, there are dozens of lists, and this is one more. And then in the Theravadan teaching that Jeanne and I have learned, there are 10 of them. And they are generosity, integrity, also called sila, renunciation, wisdom, energy, patience, truthfulness, persistence, being able to stay with it, kindness, and equanimity. So, and they all feed into each other. And in the Mahayana tradition that came later, they have 6 of them. And they're similar. Generosity and integrity are the first, then patience, and then energy, enthusiastic, going for it kind of energy. So that could combine persistence and energy. And then concentration and wisdom. And so they're really a blend of both insight and compassion. So that there are those 2 parallel things, the 2 wings of the Dharma, the wing of compassion and the wing of clear seeing, are coming together in all these teachings. And that's so lovely, I find, this blending of them both. And the Buddha emphasized the first 3 as ways of coming in to the teachings. And these are because he wanted to reach people wherever they were. So these were people of all walks of life, different castes, farmers, people who were so-called the untouchables, as well as Brahmins, everyone. And the first thing he spoke about was generosity. That sense of open-hearted giving, that there's, and that it's an equal thing between the giver and receiver. Receiving is just as precious as giving. And you know that when you give something and someone really receives it, it feels good. And you feel that energy between you. When you really receive someone's gift, whether it's the gift of time or resources or presence, something special happens. And it's not like the gift giving of conventional presents, you know, where it's Christmas time or it's a birthday or it's Easter or it's whatever the celebration is, so you have to give. This is just this response of caring, sharing and caring. And the Buddha, one of the early talks about this was he talked about how from the hoarding of resources, poverty became rife in the society by hoarding and keeping and taking of land. And when there was a lot of poverty, then there started to be theft. And when there was stealing, there was killing. And because of the killing, life was lost. And so generosity needed to come first. So that, and after he spoke that, evidently there was a wave of generosity throughout the areas of India where he was teaching. And people would leave food for others. And these paramis, equivalents of them, are common in many cultures. So many spiritual traditions have them. In indigenous cultures, they have the 7 sacred qualities. And I believe that they're very similar. There's generosity, respect, compassion, wisdom, truth-telling. So truthfulness is there too. Similar qualities in the Mi'kmaq was one I've seen recently, and the many traditions. And of course it's true in Christianity, in Muslim traditions, people saw that there are ways of life that help people live together in a harmonious way. And one of the things that many people who are teaching the Dharma, of course, including the Buddhists, saw was that it's not about a convention that's saying what's right and what's wrong, and that people will be punished if they don't do these things. It's more inner values. And these are coming from valuing and respecting ourselves and all of life. So all of the paramis about respect and intention. So we follow them because we want it to bring benefit to us and to everyone else. And so that's the key part for my own welfare and the welfare of others. This is why I'm doing it. Not because convention says I should. And so they're mind trainings. And the sila, integrity, the second of the precepts, the second of the paramis contains the precepts, which are ways of living that are essentially non-harming. And they're mind training. So he saw that if we're living together in ways that we don't cause harm, we're giving the gift of fearlessness to others. So one of the biggest gifts of generosity is fearlessness, meaning that others aren't afraid of us. We're not afraid of others. And can you imagine if a society had the gift of fearlessness? We didn't have to worry whether someone would steal our things. There was just a story on the news here in BC where a family in Nanaimo went on holiday, and when they came back, there were squatters in their house who had completely ransacked the place and tossed out their furniture and made a horrible mess. And so this is respecting and non-harming of life, not taking things that aren't freely given, practice of contentment, the practice of wise relationship, non-harming in our relationships with others, that our relationships, whether they're sexual, or with children, or with parents or friends, they're non-harming and respectful. And then speech, truthfulness in speech. And what you can see is that the paramis kind of, when you're exploring one parami, you're bringing another one in. And so with sila, it's bringing truthfulness in. And we live in a world where it's really hard when there's so much deceit and false speech everywhere. It's hard. We're seeing modeling of hostility and deceit everywhere. Our governments, our media, and it's hard to trust. And so can we practice truthfulness within ourselves? What's really true for me? Am I deceiving myself? And the wise speech is giving ourselves honest speech. And if we're not giving ourselves judgment, then it's easier to be honest. Oh, I just exaggerated. There weren't really hundreds of them. There were 10. Or whatever it was, I exaggerated. You know, just small things. I remember when I was growing up, my grandmother told this story of how she was taking my mother and my aunt on the bus when they were very small. And if you were 3 and under, there was no charge. And so my mother and my grandmother takes the 2 little girls on the bus, and there are people called bus conductors in England who take the fares. And so he bends down to my mother and he says, "And how old are you, dear?" And she said, "I'm 3, but I'm 4 when I get off the bus." And so it's that, you know, my grandmother had to persuade her, "You're 3. No, I'm 4. But so she couldn't, she was too young to understand the concept of if you say you're 3, you're free. But there's so many little ways that we find ourselves being deceitful, or that hostility arises, reactivity. And what I find helpful is that the understanding that the Paramis are all infused with kindness. Loving kindness isn't mentioned till further down, but they're all infused with generosity and kindness, so that we're able to see when we make a mistake, and rather than being judged or imprisoned for it, we can learn from it. Oh, and we can be honest with ourselves. So that kindness is really helpful. There's one of the teachings of the Buddha to his son when Rahula was only 7, evidently, according to the stories, was he says to Rahula, there are 3 times you should consider your actions: before, during, and after. If, when you're about to act, you should think, will this be of benefit to me, to others, and to both? And if it's not going to be of benefit, then you don't do it. Or you should, if it is, go ahead. In the middle of doing something, you should consider, is this working out? Is it useful? And if it isn't, stop. You know, maybe you're in the middle of gossiping about someone and you realize in the middle, this doesn't feel so good. You can stop. Or you're in the middle of eating something, you decided not to, or whatever it is. There's a possibility of stopping. Or you contemplate at the end, after you've already done it, because you weren't aware in the beginning and in the middle. And then you realize that and you learn from it. And he said to his son, you can go and talk to an elder about it. And he didn't say, you're a bad boy, you should be punished. It's more, how can we learn to train our mind in a different way? And when we have that kind of kind, honest approach, it's possible. So the kindness and truthfulness come together with generosity and with integrity. all helping us live in ways that are healthier. Renunciation is the third of the paramis. And the Buddha, I'm going a bit back and forth, but the Buddha put renunciation, they put those three together because they help us begin to refrain. Renunciation isn't about deprivation. It's about learning to let go, learning to see, do I have enough right now? Do I really need this? So it's a practice of contentment. It's refraining. Or it could be that you're sitting there and your mind is going through some story. Maybe someone betrayed you, or maybe you acted in a way that wasn't skillful, and you keep going around and around in this story and it just feeling worse and worse. Then you can refrain from that self-judging. Let it go. So renunciation is a lot about letting go. So it's not so much thou shalt not as can I let go now? Or you might notice I'm holding on to this story and it really isn't useful. It's not going in a good direction. I saw that movie, it was bad the first time. Why am I rerunning it the third time? So we're gaining experience in refraining. It could be about sense desires, consuming. We're trained to consume. Our brains are programmed. And you can see how the neurobiology works. Like I notice when I'm online, maybe I looked something up. I think I looked something up about, it was neurobiology or something. And for the next few days, I kept getting ads about that topic. And that happens. Whatever you look up, they'll throw that at you. You know, you were hooked once, you can be hooked again. Same with consuming. Throw an ad at someone enough times and somehow their mind will be drawn to it. And so it's, can we learn to see, is this really where I want to go? And I find that helpful because since the time of COVID, I've been online a lot more. And it's really easy to get seduced into all sorts of places. And then I think, why am I doing this? Is this really how I want to spend my time? And so that's renunciation. There's another form of renunciation that Philip Moffat teaches, and that's to renounce being the star of your own movie. And that's how often we do that. It's all about me. And even negative views about ourselves is a bit like that. Yvonne Rand is a Zen teacher that I sat with years ago, and she talked about a sort of reverse narcissism, you know, where you're constantly judging yourself all the time. And she said, that's just like, I'm the little piece of shit that's the center of the universe. You know, it's no different than saying I'm so great, because it's still all about me. And so, and here's where the parami of wisdom comes in, because wisdom sees that these are passing mind states. It shows that we've become identified with being the little piece of shit, or we've become identified with being the greatest, or the one who made the mistake. And the wisdom helps reveal it's just a mind state. That was a wise moment. That was a dumb moment. Or that was a moment of losing it, or whatever it was. And so the wisdom parami, when we can cultivate that in our daily lives, we can see, this isn't who I am. this is an unpleasant state. It's not permanent. And that's a relief. We're more able to move to equanimity and balance if we're not so attached and identified with all the ups and downs. Ajahn Sucitto used to talk about it being like being a yo-yo, you know, where you're up, you're down, you're up, you're down, depending on whether you approve of yourself or not. And can we see them as we got caught, we got triggered. It's not who we are. And I find it helpful too, and this is a wisdom piece as well as a compassion piece, that we have an animal hindbrain that is geared for survival. And so there are certain things that trigger a survival instinct. If someone's aggressive or frightening to us, we'll either freeze and flee or numb out, or maybe we'll attack, depending on our upbringing. It happens really fast. Or maybe it's to do with grasping. I won't have enough. It's a survival instinct, grab. So, and financially that can be true. It's a survival instinct. Or being abandoned, feeling not cared about. We're a community. And so these reflexes, seeing another person or another group of people as dangerous, a tribal instinct. My tribe is safe. Someone looks different from me, they're not safe. And so it's understanding these energies, having compassion for them, and not letting them rule our lives. So the Paramis are helping us to cross 4 floods, the teaching is. And the floods are these things that carry us away all the time. And the first one is pretty obvious. It's the flood of sense desire. It's so easy to get carried away by sense desires. For me, recently, chocolate, whatever it is, Sudoku, crossword puzzles, you know, things that I can get lost in. Or for some people, it's shopping. I have a relative, that's what does it for her. Things that I don't really need. Or anyway, sense desire. The second one is becoming. And that's a little bit what I was referring to before, the flood of becoming. We're always wanting to become. We identify with a mind state or an ideal that we have of ourselves that we're pursuing. I'm this kind of a person. And so that, the more we can release that through kindness, through patience, and through wisdom, the easier it is, the less reactive we are. And then the third flood is the flood of views and assumptions. And it's really easy to get carried away by that, especially these days. And that's kind of tied in with becoming. But we have a certain view and we fixate on that. And it could have come from our childhood, from history, from our education system, and we believe it. I think Ajahn Sucitto tells a story in one of his books about, this is a century or so ago, a comet, it was the Hale-Bopp comet or something, was coming over. And there was a sect in France that believed that they were, after the planet, there would be a host of angels that would carry them to heaven. And if they died at that time, they would go to heaven. And there were a whole bunch of people who believed it and committed suicide. I mean, it's very weird. That's an extreme thing. But there are so many different beliefs and views that we get caught in, a flood of views. And so it really helps to look at, what am I believing? Is it really true? And so the parami of truthfulness and of wisdom help us explore that and help us sort of discern between the deceits that are so prevalent in our culture. It's become so acceptable to deceive, to lie, because people are caught in sense desires, wanting more. And so we're training ourselves in different ways with all of these paramis. And then just to mention patience and resolve, patience and persistence, because that's a beautiful pair of paramis. We want to have persistence to keep going, but we also want to not keep going when it's no longer healthy for us. Maybe we're persisting in a job that's no longer good for our mental or physical health. Or we're persisting in some other particular thing that isn't working. So persistence is balanced with wisdom and also with patience. So we as someone who is, I think, came into this world impatient, it's been a very helpful parami for me, learning to be patient with my impatience. This is an impatient moment, and to, what's it like in the body? Can I be with the energy of this and let it move through? And so the paramis are helping us be with difficult mind states. So patience is really valuable in helping us be with the difficulties right now. Be patient with our friends who are maybe a bit overreactive because they're stressed. You know, I found that really helpful, to have that compassion for people in my life who I know are having a hard time, to have more space. So patience gives space and caring. And we're here for ourselves no matter what. And it's that kind of steady, calm being with, caring, that's so helpful. When we feel anger arising, patient with ourselves, letting the energy of anger move through so that our reactivity doesn't cause more reactivity. And the last quality, equanimity, is equanimity is the sort of ultimate of many of the series of the Buddhas. It's the last of the factors of awakening, and it comes at the end of many of the lists. And it's that balance and unreactivity, that sense of steadiness amidst whatever is unfolding, being balanced amidst change. And I imagine, as Susie was telling you, it's not a removed, and of course it's one of the Brahmaviharas, one of the divine abodes. It's that capacity to be here with however it is. We can have equanimity even about having no equanimity. And the best way to learn and train ourselves in equanimity is to see if we can be with those moments we have no equanimity. This is a moment of losing it. Can I be with this? And then realizing, oh, it's not me. It's not who I am. I'm reactive because I'm triggered. And so then there's understanding and compassion, and we're able to see that that moment of reactivity can pass. So there's full engagement with equanimity, and it's supported by all those other paramis. So that was a little bit of a race through the paramis. But I'd like to give you a chance to ask some questions and to just see how you are doing. And I'm happy to offer about 15 minutes of a sit if anyone wants to do that. And I also understand that it's getting later for you. So let's do some questions and answers first, or comments even, what people's experience is with the paramis.